Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Jo Wheatley, and my friend and co-host, Zoe Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here again for another episode. And this week, we're talking to you about what to do when a coaching client is looking for advice from you. And the reason we're bringing this one to you today is because it's a question that comes up in supervision frequently. It is a source of dilemma, really, when a client sits with you in a coaching session and asks for your opinion. And it's a phase, I think, that all coaches, whether you're training or experienced, go through in terms of questioning when are the right moments, or are there any right moments to give advice. So we thought we'd explore this through a few different lenses for you today.
Yeah, so we thought we'd begin with talking about when does this tend to come up in a coaching relationship? And I think it can often come up when, if you've got a coach, so somebody finds out about you as a coach, they look at your background. Let's say you've worked in HR before you became a coach, or maybe you're still working in HR alongside working as a coach, or take any other field. And the person that is coming to you works in a similar field. And so they're coming to you to coach them, but they also recognize that you have value and expertise in some of the more technical day-to-day aspects of it. And so they can often forget, through the relationship where there's trust and confidence, that it is a coaching relationship and what the difference is between coaching and mentoring, consultancy, and so on. I think it also can come up quite frequently in the beginning of a coaching relationship for similar reasons, because people have ideas around what coaching is. And you would normally talk to a client or a potential client in a chemistry conversation, exploring their understanding of what coaching is, if they've had any previous experience of coaching. But in those early stages, sessions 1 and session 2, coaching's hard work for coachees, and they can get tired. And I think often when clients get tired, they will then just kind of almost go, have you ever been in this situation before? It's kind of like, help me. I'm stuck or I'm struggling. And if they're trying to figure out what they can and can't do in a coaching relationship, they're going to test those boundaries basically through the lens of wanting to solve their challenge or progress with their challenge. So those are two obvious examples for me.
Yeah, I would also say it comes up when, excuse me. I would also say it comes up when clients have sort of like a script, if you like, for coaching speak, of deferring to other people's perspectives over their own. So when clients come to coaching, obviously they're bringing with them all their lifetime habits. And one of those habits might be a what do you think habit, and that they only perhaps take action or make decisions when they've socialized their ideas and have the approval of others. Now, that can be both helpful and unhelpful. And we'll talk about how you sort of handle these dynamics as the podcast episode goes on. So you can be aware that clients may be coming with that because it is one of the things that they are used to doing. I think another thing why clients come and ask for your advice can simply be out of respect. When they've been working with you for some time and you have a strong relationship and they trust in the relationship that you have, if they're reaching a point where they're making a critical decision, they may genuinely be interested in your perspective out of respect for the relationship that you have created together. What it's like when you have friends who you value and trust. And you may go to them for their advice and judgment because you know that they are a safe place for you. And it can be similar in coaching. Now, what you choose to do with these requests is different, but those are some of the reasons why they come up. And obviously there'll be more as well.
Yeah, when I work with a coach and I'm in the client position, I always end up asking, what do they think? What would they do in that situation? In a session, one session or other, even though I'm a coach and I know what the boundaries of coaching are. And that is because I think it's partly relationship building. So I think lots of clients or coaching clients can feel they want more than their coach just asking them questions endlessly and then being required to search and answer the questions. They want more of that what we call that equal synergistic relationship. They want it to feel like a genuine thing. Now, for me, it's also part of the way I process. So when I've got a challenge, something that I'm working on, my process involves researching. And so, finding out what do other people do in these situations? What are other people's thoughts and perspectives on it? It's not because I'm going to go and do something because somebody else has done it. I still bring it back into kind of calibrate against my values and belief systems and what's practically possible for me. But I enjoy that research part of it, and bringing it to coaching would be one part of that strategy. Now, if my coach says to me, that's really interesting you're asking me that, Joe. What's the purpose of you asking me that question? I might laugh and then understand they're holding their boundaries, and I appreciate that, and I recognize that, and I would reflect on that question, and I'm okay with it. If my coach shared with me that I've never been in your situation, but when I was in a situation like X, I did that, I would think, oh, I wonder how that applies. It's a bit different to my situation, but actually now, and I'd use that as a springboard maybe for ideas. So either way, as a client, I would be okay in the way the coach in that example handled it. But I think it's good to kind of just share that as a coach, I also will ask that.
I think it's worth us being clear that if you go down an ICF route in terms of an accreditation with the ICF, we describe them as what we would just say is purist coaching. And in a purist coaching perspective, if you imagine there's a continuum, and at one end you have mentoring, which is where you are advice giving. You are there by nature of you having more experience, perhaps in the person you are coaching, or they are there to gain value and experience from you, where you answer their questions and you share advice. And down the other end is coaching, which is purely non-directive. The ICF body sit down the purely non-directive scale. So if you are going into an ICF assessment, accreditation, advice giving is a no-no. So for being an ICF accredited coach, ACC or PCC, you need to be non-directive. If you are in the session and you are sharing your ideas and giving advice, particularly if that isn't invited, then that will not be something they are looking for. If you take the EMCC as another example, the EMCC is a European mentoring and coaching council. So there's a bit more flexibility within the EMCC to play in that coaching and mentoring continuum. And on our training courses, we talk about the critical importance of knowing where you are on that continuum at any one time and engaging within that continuum consciously, knowing what it is, how it is influencing the coaching relationship, what it is potentially doing to your coaching style or the relationship that you have. So it's about conscious engagement around this mentoring and coaching continuum. And that's really, really important, because if you engage in an unconscious way, you can step into challenges where you shift your coaching relationship, perhaps more into a parent-child perspective. And that advice giving can actually do more damage to the relationship than it can good. So we like to think of coaching relationships as adult to adult. That's where they should be. And the example that Jo shared with you earlier around how she asks for her coach's opinion is from a place of being an adult. It's from a place of researching, very much happy in her own thoughts and opinions, but it's part of her processing. So that's a healthy place to engage, as an adult to adult place. If you have a client who's asking for your advice and guidance from a place of not feeling empowered in their own ideas, then answering that essentially reinforces the perspective that they have of themselves, that their opinions aren't valid. And so that would be an example of a place where you wouldn't give an answer to their question, because that's not helpful to the client. It's actually reinforcing the thing that is leading them to be stuck. So having like a real awareness of the psychodynamics between you helps you to make conscious choices around where you play on that coaching and mentoring continuum.
And the critical reference point is always, what have you contracted for in terms of ways of working with your client? So if your client has come to you and they are engaging with you for coaching to work on a particular goal, your ethical requirements are to coach under that contract. If you've got a coach that's contracted with you and says, when you're exploring the questions around, how do you want me to be as your coach? What do you need like from me as a coach? And the client says, I don't want you to just ask me questions. Like, if you see things, I want you to tell me. I want you to help me to see my blind spots. And like, if there were times when you'd had experience of other things, I would want you to share those with me. Then, you need to know how you're going to handle that. You might say to them, well, if we engage in a coaching relationship, then this is what I can do. If we were to engage in a mentoring relationship, then this is how we would work together. Or you may engage in a contract. Some coaches do work, as Zoe was describing, sort of across that continuum, but always in service of the contract that you have together.
I think spot contracting is really important as well. So if you've got a clear contract that say that it's coaching engagement, yes, they want you to share observations, they want you to share challenges, and obviously you're going to be asking questions. And then your client says, I've got this challenge and I've done these things, and you've coached around it. And then they're like, I'm really interested. Like, what do you think I should do? That's where you could do some spot contracting, and you could say, do you know what? I could answer that question for you, but I'm wondering if it's actually more helpful if we reflect on, why my opinion is, valuable for you here. If you have a sense that they're perhaps discounting themselves, or you might say, before I answer that question, I just want to check with you, what's the purpose of you asking me that question? So you can sort of contract together around it. Typically, how I tend to answer these questions is in an indirect way. So when a client says, what do you think I should do? I don't tend to answer that question. I tend to reflect back some of the things that I've heard. So it might be like, well, I've heard you mention that this is important to you and that is important to you, and this is, critical to you. So I'm thinking it might be helpful for you to reflect on blah. So I tend to like give a pointer without saying like, oh, I think you should take job A, if they're looking at a decision, because in my coaching, I don't feel that my opinion is valuable in those. I think I can bring a coaching flavor to the way I answer those requests.
There's so many ways that you can respond to requests like that. So if a client says, what do you think? You could, for example, reflect back to the client and say, I noticed that. So let's say I'd ask the client, I don't know, a simple question like, what options do you see here for yourself? And the client says, oh, I just don't know, because like I've thought about this and I've thought about that. Like, what would you do? I might then reflect back and say, well, I noticed that you've already identified 3 options as you were processing that there. I hear that you've discounted them. I also notice that when I ask you what you would do, you are answering by asking me what I would do. And then I might just hold silence and just see what emerges for the client in response to that. Or I might ask them, is this a theme in your life? When you're facing challenge, is this a theme in your life? And then all of a sudden they might, as they're reflecting, they might say, oh my goodness, yes. Like when I think about last year when I had that, I went to this person and that person and asked them, and then I did what they said, and actually it didn't turn out very well. They'll give the story and the outcomes, around it. So we do need to be very careful, as Zoe was saying, that we don't collude with our clients' belief system if that belief system is part of the obstacle to them achieving their goal. And so we can be invited to get into the detail with our client, or as the coach, we can also make sure that we are continuously zooming out and looking at the bigger picture. So is the reason that my client is asking me this question, is it a symptom of something else that's getting in their way that we need to work on together? So that's an alternative approach. We can hold the boundaries. We that question around, what's the purpose or the reason for wanting to know my thoughts on it? We can ask them questions like, if I were to answer that question, what belief would that reinforce for you?
And of course, your client might turn around and go, no, I really just want to know what your opinion is. And I think when you have those moments and you choose to answer, again, it's going back to what Joe said about it being a springboard. So that's not where you go into a monologue of all the ideas that you've been sitting on in your own mind about what your client could do to solve the problem. You might just say, do you know, one obvious idea that's been floating around my mind as you've been talking is maybe something about, make a light suggestion. And then what do you think about that? And they might go, yeah, I've tried that. And that was no use. Or they might go, oh, actually, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And then you come back with, well, what other ideas does that generate in you? And that's a presupposition that that idea you've just given them has enabled them to come up with more of their own ideas. So, you know, there's ways that you can be playful with it. I remember when I was training to be a coach, and I had this client, and we were quite far into our coaching relationship, and we'd been talking about confidence and relationships. And in this particular session, this client shared a conflict that they had with somebody close to them, and they asked me for my opinion on whether I thought this client, he was in the right or the wrong. And I remember sharing that my perspective was I could see how the other person thought that this client was in the wrong. Now, obviously, with the experience I have today, I can see the error of my ways. That was a completely clunky way to handle that situation. And it did damage the rapport in the relationship, and it took a while to kind of get back on track. So I think why I'm sharing that is because in the early days we are training to be a coach, you will be tested in these moments, and you will make mistakes, and you will need to learn from them. And that's okay as well. So I think it's easy for training providers to say, don't do it. But if you don't ever do it, you won't ever get to learn what it actually does to influence the relationship.
I've had some examples come up in supervision recently where coaches have shared how clients have been, bringing into the conversation things like, oh, the person there that there's some tension in relationship sent me this email which said da, 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 and like recounting it to the coach. Now the coach doesn't need to know what the content is of that email, text message, conversation or whatever it is. So we were talking about a way to handle that as being, coaching is about me supporting you, in the choices that you want to make and this goal of X that you want to achieve. I notice that when we start focusing in on those things, you bring in this other person into the session so that there are three of us here. And again, share the observation, just hear what the client says. The client might say, yeah, why do I do that? And then you might explore that. Or they might say, well, it's just because it's just happened and I just need to get it off my chest. And then you might do some contracting or recontracting around how you're going to use the time together in those sessions. So noticing as I was talking about earlier as well, the dynamics in the relationship, because some clients, as much as they want to work on their goal, can almost bring in the content as a distraction. Like they already know the story. If we're only asking them questions about their story, they're just reinforcing the story that they're already telling themselves, which is not, and that is not coaching.
I think also if you're frequently making choices to lean to advice giving, you are probably coaching in a very narrow space. So when you're in options, for example, and a client doesn't have any more ideas and they get stuck, and you're trying to ask them questions around, well, what could you do? What would be most helpful if you had a magic wand? Like, what would you do? And the client's like, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. You need to go back a number of steps in your coaching to help the client to really connect in and broaden out their reality. So if you take the grow, I think what I'm referencing here is the grow model. Like if you've got a clear goal your client wants, you've got a clear outcome established, and you do a really good in-depth reality exploration, so exploring the client's relationship to the problem, the emotions that it brings, the things that they've tried, the influence that it might be having on their broader life, some of their strengths and qualities that could be really helpful in resourcing them with this challenge that they're facing. If you do a really in-depth, their options are going to be easy. Whereas if you just dip your toes in, like, oh, so how is this a challenge for you and what have you tried? Great, what could you do about it? Your client's not going to be able to answer those questions. So if you're finding as a coach that you're always needing to give advice because your clients are always asking you, look to your own coaching as well and check in. Are you helping the client to widen out that gap and really understand the gap between where they are and where they need to get to? Are you coaching the gap or are you coaching the story? And that's kind of what some of Joe was alluding to just then.
Another way to approach it is they're asking you as the coach for your thoughts and views, which, as we say, that wouldn't be purist coaching. So instead, you could redirect to, I noticed that you're asking me, but would it be more helpful if we actually took some time to explore other people's perspectives around this? So perceptual positions is an activity that you can do where you identify friend, mentor, and hero, I think it is. Yeah. I mean, you could choose other titles that were more in the language of, of your client, maybe that had come up already in the coaching. But in the activity as it is, it's those three things. And they are those roles. So all of them in the past, so past friend, current friend, and future friend, past hero, current hero, future hero, and so on. So you have 9 different perceptual positions. Now, of course, all of these are actually the client's voice. That's the beauty of it. So if you were doing it in person, you would have the individual stood on you in the center, and you'd have labels of these people around the outside, these 9 people. And in essence, what they do is the client stands on you, they describe the challenge that they would like information, advice, and guidance on, and then they would go and they take in turns, which one would you like to hear from first? They'd go and step into that position facing where they were stood before, the you in the center of the circle. And they would connect in with their kind of inner wisdom through the filter or the lens of that persona or that part of them, essentially. And then they go back into the center and they face that role, they thank them for it, and they go back out to each of the roles. So they may find that a way to break through the resistance that they've got to options or insights when they think, I just can't do it, by tapping into what they think are other people, but in reality are their own voices and perspectives. So that's a way to navigate into an activity, which for some clients can bring safety. Like if you give an overview of what you could do together, and then the client gets to make that informed decision around, do they think it will be useful for them or not? They're not worried about there being any surprises. And they feel that they often will have a confidence around doing an activity because they feel like, oh, it's something that coaches may be facilitated with others and so on. So it shifts the energy. And often I think what happens is these situations where the client is asking for your view is often because there's an energy block. So as a coach, it's thinking about how can I help to shift that energy?
Yeah, so a number of ways that you can help a client when they ask you for your advice and guidance. And if you're looking for a safe place to be able to learn these different approaches and techniques, you want to train as a coach, but you've been concerned around not getting it right or making mistakes, just want to extend to you that everybody has unlearning to do. And part of the unlearning and coaching often is around how do you actually stop yourself from wanting to solutionize. So we welcome that unlearning and we will support you in that journey. So if you're thinking of training to a coach, come and join us, and you can check out our courses at www.igcompany.co.uk or take our quiz at mycoachingcourse.com.